You're welcome to the Gavel. I'm Linda Akibi. The National Assembly passed the Electoral Act Amendment Bill before embarking on its annual recess a week ago. However, the amendment of Clause 52.3 on electronic transmission of votes by the Senate has shocked many Nigerians and caused a rift between opposition lawmakers and their colleagues in the ruling party. We revisit the passage of the Electoral Act Amendment Bill in the National Assembly and its implication for future elections. The Electoral Act Amendment Bill is one of the most polarizing pieces of legislation in the Ninth Assembly. Nigerians have yearned for the passage of this critical bill, believing it will sanitize elections, which have been overwhelmed with violence, ballot box snatching, underage voting and cash for votes.
Clause 52.3.
But Clause 52, subsection 3 on electronic transmission of results caused a huge strain in both the Senate and House of Representatives, setting lawmakers from the ruling party against their colleagues in the opposition party. It is also causing uncertainty in the public space as to the intention of Parliament in promoting credible elections and the fate of electronic transmission of results in future elections. Section 52, subsection 3 of the report in the Senate states that the Commission may transmit election results by electronic means where and when practicable. But an amendment to the clause which caused a rift among lawmakers was adopted and the Electoral Act Amendment Bill passed.
The Commission may consider electronic transmission of results provided the national coverage is adjudged to be adequate and secure by the National Communication Commission (NCC) and approved by the National Assembly.
The House passed the Electoral Act Amendment Bill and retained Clause 52, which empowers INEC to decide on the best means to transmit election results. It also adopted a motion deleting the use of electronic means in the bill. But some members of civil society organizations questioned the amendment of Clause 52, subsection 3 by the Senate.
INEC cannot be subject to NCC. INEC is only subject to National Assembly because they make rules. That's the Electoral Act. At the public hearing, it was audible to the deaf. The blind could see that everybody wants the digitalization process in our electoral system.
It could have been better if the National Assembly had created a framework for some form of synergy between the NCC and INEC and say, okay, how can you work together? You can even do a pilot. You can even do a pilot to say, we want to pilot this process in 6 states. It's a learning process.
But these public analysts are reminding Nigerians that despite the controversial amendment of Clause 52, subsection 3 by the Senate, there are some gains in the bill which will have huge impact on future elections.
The funny thing is that the same Clause 52 that people tend to argue about also had its own positive. 52, there's 52, 1, 2, 3, depending on Senate or House of Reps. The 52 gave for the very first time in our electoral architecture an e-voting platform. That should be celebrated. And both the Senate and the House of Reps, I'd agree on that. The dispute is just the transmission.
Both chambers are to come up with a harmonized bill, and it's not clear what will be the final position of Parliament on the matter of electronic transmission of votes. Nevertheless, the expectation is that ultimately the National Assembly will produce a legislation to make future elections more credible and transparent, and President Buhari will sign the bill well ahead of the 2023 general elections to give INEC enough time to prepare. We're still taking a look at the Electoral Act Amendment Bill passed recently by the National Assembly and its implications for future elections. We had a chat with a senior program officer at the Center for Democracy and Development, Mr. Austin Aibe, where we talked about the amendments made by the Senate and the House of Representatives on the bill.
That for the very first time in our architecture, what we're belonging to have, that the opaque system of transmitting results in this country must be forgotten. I'll tell you why electronic voting is very important. It will save Nigeria huge resources. The kind of money we spend on printing currency-level ballot papers in this country can be avoided. And that's what the National Assembly just did. What am I talking about? The presidential election, let's stay with the presidential election because it's the entire country. Every polling unit had a coded level ballot papers. So polling unit 1, the kind of code on the ballot, even though it's the same election, is different from the next polling unit, which means you can't take the ballot for polling unit 1 to polling unit 2. The idea was to curtail, election manipulators, which was very interesting. But the cost of doing that, nobody want to care about it. And this is the flip side. In the 2019 election, there were 84 million plus registered voters. And eventually, President Buhari was declared winner with about 15 million plus, and the runner-up had about 12 million thereabout. If you add up all the votes, both the rejected vote, the valid vote together, it was less than 40 million. Arguably, another 40 million ballot paper were wasted. If you then look at that 40 million monetarily, you're going to find out that there are 40 million naira that we have to waste for conducting a presidential election.
Which aspects of the Electoral Act Amendment Bill just passed by the National Assembly are you not very enthusiastic about?
Okay, so I think it's important to draw that, even though they've said that's been addressed, the returning officer making the final decision, that's a lacuna in the previous regime that we had, that the returning officer will have the final say. So if election took place at a polling unit, it gets moved up to the returning officer, who is expected to announce and return the candidate, then makes a final decision. That happened in Osun election. Results were already proceeding over. When it got to the point of the state collation center, suddenly a returning officer said there was 1 vote and certain 9 vote that is missing somewhere, and because of that declared the process inconclusive. Whereas we tried to find out where is the vote. A returning officer should not have that power. He should announce the result that got to him or her. But that has been addressed with the power given to INEC to then checkmate. So if there are cases like that, INEC can then set up its relevant committees. Maybe that's a decision that will be taken by the electoral management body to then maybe bring in media, civil society organization, security architecture, and have a meeting, and then count the ballot papers again, and then do a formal declaration. That will address that.
Now, looking at what was passed by the Senate as regards Section 52.3, what are your thoughts on that amendment?
INEC cannot be subject to NCC. INEC is only subject to National Assembly because they make rules. That's the Electoral Act. And the rules they make is public perception that goes into that act. And at the public hearing, it was audible to the deaf. The blind could see that everybody wants the digitalization process in an electoral system. Everybody. Almost every, in fact, 99.9% of people who spoke at that public hearing talked about the need for a system that is foolproof to manipulation. And what is that system? It's a digital process. I know the fears of the Senate, and I try to address some of them. Number one is hacking. In fact, the chair of the committee of INEC, Distinguished Senator Gaya, had amplified that. The truth of the matter is this. You only even talk about, and in fact, he cited the US example that Russia had to meddle into the 2016 poll and all of that. The truth of the matter is this. We are not running an online voting. We must take note of that. Online voting is when you you log in on a portal somewhere in your home or somewhere outside of this country, you log on, and then you click on the vote with some ID, maybe your VIN number that is on your voter's card, then you vote. So, yes, you could argue that somebody who controls the internet, because we don't control the internet, somebody who controls the internet somewhere can actually from the back end see what you are voting and change it. Let's agree on that, but we are not there yet. What we are doing is e-voting. At the polling unit level, everyone who is registered to vote will still come out on election day, queue up, and get to the point, rather than giving you a ballot paper, you just click on the machine. The machine records the vote. At this point, the machine doesn't need to be internet-based. It is recorded at that machine. It's like you storing a number on your mobile phone without a network. You can store a number on your phone. But for you to make a call, you need a network. So let's now move to the point that they are arguing. That there is no network in my village, in my polling unit, there's no network. For Christ's sake, that if you send a message on your on a WhatsApp portal, for example, In your village, you send a message, and you are sending it to Abuja, and you are on your way from your village to catch the flight at the city center. Along the road when you are moving to the airport, at any time that platform connects to the internet, it goes without your approval. You have sent it. 2G can run an effective test, but maybe not image. That we have 2G 44% coverage of this country, then about 50% of 3G. Put that together, this country is covered about 94%. Internet-wise, 2G plus 3G. Then we have a blind spot, about 6%. And INEC has done an analysis. Let me even tell you something that most people may not know. Since 2018, INEC has been piloting electronic transmission. Because it is not official, they can't use it. They can't use it legally and otherwise. INEC since the last previous election, including Edo and Ondo, what you saw as the voter platform where people were sending images is an online platform. Meanwhile, in Edo State and Ondo State, across the nook and cranny, even in the riverine area, results came from there. Somebody will not tell me that there's no internet in his village. Because of that, we should jettison if the future. The future is electronic. The future we live today is electronic. JAM runs electronic, online examination now. Almost all the platform. People who send 5 million, 10 million, and they transfer it using their mobile phone are afraid of sending results from one polling unit to the collation center.
But do you not think that the concerns raised by the Senate, as regards issues of transmission, electronic transmission and hacking and the coverage, are these not legitimate concerns?
The Senate of our National Assembly is empowered by the Constitution. INEC is empowered by the Constitution. The NCC is not. Why give power to NCC the kind of power it doesn't have? What INEC has done consistently is the right thing. INEC has been working with the NCC. There's a committee of the INEC, NCC, and service provider. In fact, service provider, you would have read in some blog and some reportage that some telecom providers have come out to say, well, we can transmit results from all the polling units. Positive. In fact, I think it was one of the service providers that claimed that they have internet coverage in 85% of Nigerian location. 85%. One service provider. And we have more than one in this country. Why are we wasting time? If there are even 20% of blind spot, all we need to do is to concentrate on that blind spot to ensure that results are transmitted from there as quickly as possible. Why was result not delayed in Ondo election? People have not paid attention to Ondo of 2016, Edo of 2016, Edo of 2020, and Ondo of 2020. Results were announced earlier compared to then. Because you have to wait to cross the river. And we'll be waiting for one local government, waiting forever. You don't need that human being to not cross. We rely on the transport union who make yanga on the morning of election. I tell you, INEC faces a lot of logistic challenge, especially on election day. All of the transport companies that INEC would have agreed with, they've signed a accord in the morning. They will now come to say, well, the price we talked yesterday, my organ agree. And INEC is like, but you have to move material now. Yeah, if you're not settled, we'll not go again. And at that point, you have to renegotiate. And it's usually on the high side.
As both chambers have passed the bill, and we're expecting that they will both harmonize and come up with a bill to send to the president for assent, what do you expect going forward?
What we want to see is an election process that is devoid of human errors. A process where the male, female, youth, person with disability can effectively work together and contest for position that they wish. They must not be deprived by money bags, particularly incumbents who have all the resources and state apparatus, to usurp on what they could do. If the people's power to vote must truly be given to the people. And for that to happen, the people's vote must count. And one way for the people's vote to count is e-voting plus e-transmission of results.
You're welcome back to the Gavel. We continue with a conversation on the Electoral Act Amendment Bill, and we sat down with a public analyst, Mr. Armsfree Ajanaku, to discuss the implications of the legislation on future elections.
we cannot talk about the elections, the general elections, without talking about how the political parties themselves nominate their candidates, elect their candidates. So part of the problems we've had with our democracy is that the party processes have not been transparent, they have not been participatory enough. And when you have a process that is not participatory from the level of the political party, it will go on to affect the outcome, the choices of the people, even in the general election or maybe in a governorship election. And so I think it's commendable, the aspects of the amendment process that focused on direct primaries, meaning members of a political party who are registered, it then means that whether the political party likes it or not, it has to produce a register of members, and it's on the basis of this register of members that a direct election of all the members of the political party will be conducted. And I think that would definitely increase participation in the process, instead of this situation you have in political parties where maybe one money bag just gets to determine who. Yeah, there will still be intrigues, no doubt, but it would open up the space the more for issues to be discussed within the parties, candidates to be scrutinized properly, because not you no longer have like an electoral college of people who just choose themselves to determine who becomes the candidate of a political party.
Now, looking at the concerns raised by the Senate and even the House of Representatives concerning the electronic transmission of votes, issues of coverage, of network coverage across the country to drive the process, do you feel that these concerns are not legitimate?
No one is saying those concerns are not legitimate, but even in other aspects of our national life, the key question is, we've been deploying technology. For example, in the financial sector, we are deploying technology in villages across this country. We are using POS machines. In fact, that has led to financial inclusion. And INEC themselves have come out to say they have the capacity to do electronic transmission of results. In fact, they have done it in several elections, starting from the first election that was held immediately after the COVID-19 pandemic. After when COVID came, there was the election in Nasarawa State that INEC conducted, and it started experimenting with this whole thing around electronic transmission of results. And like I mentioned, in Edo State and in Ondo State, it already started using. So if INEC is saying we are ready, yes, I agree we need to scrutinize its readiness, but it could have been better if the National Assembly had created a framework for some form of synergy between the NCC and INEC and say, okay, how can you work together? You can even do a pilot. You can even do a pilot to say, we want to pilot this process in 6 states. It's a learning process, but to throw out electronic transmission completely, where technology is adding value to the process, is to say that you want you have an ulterior motive, and that's the way the Nigerian people are reading it. And this conversation is important because it's also about the way the Nigerian people perceive the decision makers. And now it's even a two-step thing. NCC has to give its stamp that we can go ahead with it. Then the National Assembly, which, whether you like it or not, has a lot more partisan, it's a partisan majority that would determine that, no longer an independent body like INEC that will say, okay, we want to go ahead of this. So if the APC, for example, is not comfortable with electronic transmission, they can simply say, talk to, NCC, you have intrigues behind the scene, and they will jettison it. So they are making it seem like they have not thrown it out completely, but from the way we see it, we are seeing it that this is more like you just create some roadblocks for INEC so that you constrain the capacity of INEC, or you constrain the powers of INEC to really be able to move forward with that. Like I said, this is technology. We're not saying technology is foolproof. Technology can also fail. And like I said, this could be a pilot, it could be a phased thing. So if we are to just anchor our discussion around the argument of the Senate that you want uniformity, are you telling us that if it's in 100 years' time that there will be network in Yobe, it's in 100 years' time we'll use electronic, electronic means to transmit results? So eventually we have to anchor it on INEC's own readiness and INEC's own willingness to take up that challenge, which they have indicated that they are willing to take up. They want to do this as a way of deepening the credibility of the electoral process. And let me just add, in a final response to that question, that we have been on the field and we have seen how the collation process works. So it's the National Assembly telling us that they prefer a collation process that is riddled with human errors, a collation process where sometimes collation goes on for 3 days, because, in fact, you even have situation in which the human resource you need to properly collate the election results, in many cases, you don't have it.
More reactions are trailing the passage of the Petroleum Industry Bill and the Electoral Act Amendment Bill in the National Assembly. This time, a lawmaker representing Bayelsa Central Senatorial District, Senator Seriake Dixon, is asking President Buhari not to sign the Petroleum Industry Bill and the Electoral Act Amendment Bill. Briefing journalists at the National Assembly, he says the two bills did not take into account the wishes and aspirations of a majority of Nigerians, as he wants the bill to be put through further legislative work. On the PIB, Senator Dixon is warning that the 3% trust fund approved for host communities in the PIB by the National Assembly is an unwise decision and a recipe for crisis in the Niger Delta region. The National Assembly had passed the PIB, providing for 3% yearly operational cost of oil companies to be paid in a dedicated account called the Host Communities Development Trust Fund, which will be used for the development of the communities and also protect the pipelines. But Senator Dixon blames the slash to the Host Community Fund from 5 to 3% to the mismanagement of the request by some key players in the executive arm of government, particularly the Minister of State for Petroleum Resources, Mr. Timiprie Silva, who he says presented an initial 2.5%, but also pushed strongly for it to be passed.
I thought that the host communities and the people should have been placed as the #1 partners for stability and for development of the oil-producing areas in order to guarantee sustainability in this critical industry, without which the national economy will collapse. So this is why I disagree with the strategic management. So direct your question to the Petroleum Minister and the GMD, especially the Petroleum Minister. It will answer why President Yaradua proposed this, 10%. President Buhari proposed earlier 5%, and why he from Bayelsa came to the National Assembly to propose 2.5%.
On the Electoral Act Amendment Bill, Senator Dixon says the bill is trying to undermine the powers and independence of INEC.
While casting my vote for electronic transmission, as you all know, I made it very clear that it is unconstitutional for the National Assembly, for any arm, for anybody, to subordinate the independence and operational powers and discretion conferred by the Constitution on INEC. You can't subordinate INEC to any other body. It is not constitutional. And if that ends up as the position of both chambers, you can be very clear, you can be sure what the likely decisions of the courts will be.
His position is not supported by some of his colleagues in the ruling APC.
We are not saying that electronic voting or transmission is not good, but we are saying that it is not the time. So why would you even contemplate on using it when you know that only 46 or 43% of Nigerians is confirmed by NCC have network coverage?
This is where we call it a day on this week's edition of The Gavel. If you have any views on any of the issues discussed, please email us on thegavel@channelstv.com. Thank you for staying with us and see you again next week.